What if the Roman Empire never fell? Imagine walking down the streets of modern-day London, but instead of the Gothic spires or steel skyscrapers we know, the skyline is dominated by the majestic, soaring arches of massive aqueducts and the white marble domes of the Forum. Imagine that the primary language of global commerce is not English, but a evolved, streamlined Latin. Imagine that the concept of the nation-state France, Germany, Britain, Spain does not exist, replaced by the provinces of a singular planetary administration. We are taught that the Roman Empire fell. In 476 AD, the last Western emperor was deposed, the lights went out, and Europe stumbled into the Dark Ages. But what if that collapse never happened? What if, instead of fracturing and decaying, Rome had managed to stabilize, reform, and endure? What if the Pax Romana didn't end in the 5th century, but continued into the Renaissance, the Industrial Age, and the modern era? Today, we are going to trace the timeline of an empire that refused to die. We are stepping into an alternate history where the Eagle of Rome never stopped flying, and where the course of human civilization followed the rhythm of the Mediterranean heart rather than the fragmenting borders of Europe. To understand a world where Rome never falls, we have to pick our moment of survival. History is a fragile tapestry. The Western Roman Empire wasn't destroyed by a single catastrophic blow. It was eroded by economic stagnation, plague, and constant political infighting. Let's look at the mid-5th century. The Western Empire is hanging by a thread. The Vandals have sacked Rome. The Goths have carved out kingdoms. But there was a man, a Roman general named Majorian. In our timeline, Majorian was perhaps the last true hope for the West. He was a capable commander who actually managed to reclaim lost territories and stabilize the borders. But he was betrayed and executed in 461 AD. In our alternate history, Majorian survives. He secures the loyalty of the army, executes the treacherous Ricimer, and consolidates his power. He doesn't just hold the line, he institutes the Majorian reforms. He cracks down on tax evasion among the aristocracy, rebuilds the infrastructure of the Italian heartland, and crucially, he mandates a new military doctrine that integrates the Germanic tribes into the Roman state as citizens rather than mercenaries. By 500 AD, the Western Empire isn't just surviving, it's thriving. The bleeding has stopped. The administrative machinery of the Roman state, which had been grinding to a halt, is oiled and running again. The concept of the state is reinvigorated, and the decentralization that would become feudalism is choked out in its cradle. One of the most persistent myths about the Roman Empire is that they were anti-technology because they relied on slave labor. If you have infinite slaves, why build a machine? This is partly true, but it misses a fundamental fact. The Romans were engineers of the highest order. They built the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and the greatest road network in antiquity. In a timeline where Rome survives, necessity becomes the mother of invention. As the empire matures and the labor force becomes more expensive and harder to manage, the Roman state faces a choice: innovate or collapse. Without the Dark Ages, those centuries where infrastructure crumbled and knowledge was lost, the Roman focus on applied engineering continues uninterrupted. By the year 1000 AD, the Roman Empire isn't just building roads, they are building advanced watermill systems for mass manufacturing. They are experimenting with steam power based on the Aeolipile invented by Hero of Alexandria centuries earlier. Why? Because the state demands it. The bureaucracy requires constant output for the legions and the cities. Rome doesn't have a renaissance because it never had to go through a rebirth of lost knowledge. It simply builds on top of the old foundation. By the year 1400, Roman galleys aren't just powered by rowers, they are augmented by primitive but effective steam piston drives. The Roman Navy dominates the seas, not just through numbers but through superior naval engineering. The Industrial Revolution in this timeline happens in the Mediterranean basin, not in the coal mines of England. The empire becomes a superpower of steel and steam centuries before the rest of the world catches up. The most difficult question in this scenario is, what happens to Christianity? In our history, the Church became the heir to the Roman Empire, preserving its structure in the absence of a central state. But if the Roman state remains, does it allow the Church to become an independent power? Unlikely. A persistent Roman Empire would likely have kept the Church as a department of the state, much like the Byzantine Empire did in the East. The Pope would remain the Bishop of Rome, but he would be subordinate to the Emperor. Or perhaps Rome evolves a new state religion, a syncretic blend of old pagan traditions and imperial cults, rebranded for the modern age. Imagine a Roman Empire where the cult of the state is the dominant religion. It wouldn't be about polytheism, it would be about the sanctity of the Roman idea. The emperor is the Pontifex Maximus, the bridge between the people and the divine, not just in religious terms, but in political ones. The wars of religion that tore Europe apart, the 30 Years' War, the Inquisition, never happen. The state is the ultimate arbiter of truth. While this might sound stable, it also implies a terrifying level of social control. A state that demands total loyalty and possesses the technological means to enforce it would be an empire of strict order where dissent is not just a crime, but a heresy against civilization itself. This is where things get truly global. In our history, the Age of Discovery was driven by a need to find new routes to the east to bypass the Ottoman-controlled Silk Road. If Rome never falls, it is the Silk Road. It controls the Mediterranean, the Near East, and North Africa. It has no need to sail around the world to find spices. However, Rome is a beast of expansion. It is encoded in their DNA. By 1500, with steam-powered naval technology, the Romans turned their eyes to the Atlantic. They aren't looking for India. They are looking for Provincia Nova, the new province. The Roman colonization of the Americas would be systematic. It would not be a series of independent colonies competing with one another. It would be a state-sponsored expansion. The entire coastline of the Americas would be paved with Roman roads. Aqueducts would be built in the Andes. The indigenous empires, the Aztecs and the Incas, wouldn't just be conquered, they would be integrated into the Roman administrative system. They would be offered the choice: adapt to Roman law, pay taxes, and join the empire, or be crushed by the legions. Given the Roman history of assimilating conquered peoples, the Americas would become a vibrant, multi-ethnic part of the Roman superstate. Imagine a new Rome in the middle of Mexico City, or a Nova Carthago on the coast of Brazil. The Americas would not be Europeanized in the way we know. They would be Romanized. By the 19th and 20th centuries, we are looking at a planetary Roman Empire. The political structure of this world is staggering. Imagine a global senate in Rome, with representatives from provinces in Gaul, Hispania, Egyptus, and the Americas. The world is connected by a singular network of high-speed Roman rails, powered by steam and, eventually, early electricity. But this brings us to the ultimate paradox of the Roman Empire: scale. The greatest enemy of Rome was always Rome itself. The bigger it got, the harder it was to govern. Corruption was the rot that fueled the empire's internal decay. In our timeline, communication was slow, so provinces could break away. In a world of steam and telegraphy, Roman telegraphy, likely using visual signals or early electric wire, that centralization is much easier. However, a Roman Empire that survives for 2 millennia wouldn't be a monolith. It would be a federalist monster. It would have to evolve into a collection of semi-autonomous states, all swearing allegiance to the emperor in Rome. It would be a sort of super version of the European Union, but with a single military, a single currency, the denarius, and a single legal code, the Corpus Juris Civilis. There would be no world wars as we know them. There would only be civil wars, massive, devastating, planetary-scale civil wars between different pretenders to the throne. Imagine a conflict where the legions of the Americas rebel against the legions of Europe, fighting over control of the global tax base. These would be conflicts on a scale that makes our world wars look like border skirmishes. But we must ask ourselves, what would we lose? Our modern world is built on the diversity of nations, the clash of ideas, and the competition between states. This competition, the need to innovate to survive, is what drove the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, and our modern democracy. If Rome never fell, the world would be incredibly stable. Yes, it would be highly ordered. But would it be creative? Rome was a culture of order, law, and engineering. It was not a culture of revolutionary thinking. The Romans were brilliant at improving things, but were they innovators of the human spirit? Would we have Shakespeare? Would we have the radical questioning of authority that defined the 18th century? Or would we be living in a world of stifling bureaucratic stagnation where the highest virtue is not freedom or discovery, but Romanitas, the Roman way of being? In this world, dissent is dangerous. The state is eternal. The emperor is the center of the universe. It is a world of marble, of law, and of peace. But it is a world without the messiness of human progress. It is a world that stopped evolving because it convinced itself it had already reached the pinnacle of perfection. Ultimately, the dream of a Roman Empire that never fell is the dream of a world without chaos. It is the desire for a central authority that protects us from the uncertainty of history. But history is defined by its uncertainty. The fall of Rome allowed for the rise of a multitude of smaller powers. From those smaller powers came the competition that eventually gave birth to our modern, chaotic, vibrant, and innovative world. If Rome never fell, we might never have had the printing press in the way we did, because a monolithic state might have censored it to prevent the spread of subversive ideas. We might never have had the American Revolution because there would be no concept of freedom as an independent, God-given right, only the rights granted by the Roman state. We would be safer, certainly. Perhaps we would have avoided the genocides and total wars of the 20th century. Or perhaps the conflicts of the empire would have been even more devastating. It is a fascinating thought experiment, a world where the sun never sets on the Roman standard. A world where, instead of looking back at ancient ruins, we are living inside them, maintaining them, living the life our ancestors began 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire fell, but did it really? In a sense, we are all Romans. Our laws, our languages, our architecture, our concepts of citizenship, of the state, of the military, they are all shadows cast by that persistent idea. Maybe the reason we are so obsessed with the idea of Rome never falling is that we haven't actually moved on. We still use their calendars, we still use their legal concepts, and we still model our own governments on the Senate and the people. Perhaps the empire didn't fall. Perhaps it just changed shape. It became the world we live in today. So, the next time you see a marble building, the next time you hear a word derived from Latin, or the next time you look at a map and see the borders of Europe, remember, the Roman Empire is still here. It didn't fall. It just became everything. Thank you for exploring this what if with me. The history of the Roman Empire is a bottomless well of intrigue, and the question of its collapse is one of the greatest debates in academia. If you have your own theory on what would have happened if the eagle had stayed aloft, I'd love to hear it in the comments.